Okay, now we're recording. Cool. Hey everyone, it's Scott again, Heroic Studios Gaming, but also here on behalf of Rock Manor Games to talk about Maximum Apocalypse and Few and Cursed, particularly Few and Cursed, because that's what we're kickstarting right now. So thanks for joining. If you're joining, thanks for watching later on YouTube or wherever it is that you're viewing this. Videos on demand. But I am the creator of Maximum Apocalypse, the RPG, which is down in the corner over here. And then I also created Heroic Studios Gaming, and from that I've created Beta Red, which is at the top. And I'm going to be adding the Few and Curse logo. I just haven't done that yet. So that'll be everything that I've worked on. The website over here, that's that side. Everything's reversed. That website I have to work out. I apparently lapsed on the payment to Wix, but it's fine because Wix and I were in a disagreement about how much I was paying for what services I was getting anyway. But that does exist, and I will correct that. So probably by the time that, if you're watching this on YouTube, by the time that you're watching this, I will have figured that one out. I just recently found out that it wasn't working anymore. But anyway, hi. Thanks for coming. Today we're going to be talking about NPCs kind of in general, but general NPC knowledge does help create NPCs in the Few and Cursed and in Maximum Apocalypse and everything. There's some twists, some things I do differently than most people, which isn't super surprising. Most stuff out there to tell you how to create NPCs covers a lot of the same subjects I'll cover because I got my information from those things as well. I, like many of you, am just sort of learning how to do this as I go, sort of self-studied. I just have a few years of experience with it. And for those that don't know my years of experience, I have about 20 years of gaming. It's a little iffy because I can't remember exactly what year it was when I started playing RPGs, but I became a GM right after that. So most of that time is like maybe 1 or 2 years difference between when I started playing RPGs and when I started doing the game mastery thing. So like 20 years of gaming, and then like, because it's 2022, so 20 years of gaming, and then like 18 years of game mastering. So, you know, there's that. But anyway, I'm just self-studied. I've read books like The Kobold's Guide to World Building and, you know, that kind of stuff. But I've also taken some classes, and I've also done writing things. And really, there's actually, when it comes to NPCs, like a lot of the stuff that you learn in writing courses or in seminars and stuff is actually quite useful for writing NPCs for RPGs as well. Because you have to make them essentially feel like people. So that's really what you're going to do, and that's really what we're going to talk about today, is trying to make your NPCs, which are sort of background setting, a lot of the time they're the set dressing for your story, make them feel like they're real and not that they're just existing to do things for the players. I don't know if you've watched like Epic NPC Man from Viva La Dirt League, but those guys, they have done a lot with sort of telling the story of like NPCs who sit around and wait for the adventurers to come along, and then they give them quests. And your NPCs could be like that in a tabletop RPG, but they really shouldn't be, right? They should be people who are doing their own things, and they shouldn't just be sitting around as like the garlic farmer waiting for players to show up and so that they can give them a quest as they stand outside of their store. They really shouldn't be that, but that doesn't mean that they aren't. And there's also a reason for why you might have NPCs like that when you're going about making an adventure. It basically breaks down into what kind of NPC are they, what kind of role do they serve, and if their job is to give information or quests to players, then that's what they do. Sometimes, though, you can realize that you don't need an NPC for that sort of thing. You could have like a bounty board or, you know, a community newspaper or something else that you can use to provide that role, and so that doesn't need to be an NPC per se. And so that's sort of the question that you have to ask yourself. Does this information that I'm conveying, can it be conveyed in a document? Is it in a newspaper they find, a journal or something, or is it a person that tells it to them? Now, it's obviously more compelling for them to have a dialogue with someone, and if that's the case, if you're choosing to have a dialogue rather than just here's a news clipping that your character stumbled across at some point, then we got to talk about what that looks like when you create that dialogue with that person, because everyone will be slightly different. If all of your NPCs look exactly the same, it kind of gets boring. I was in a game, I've been in many games actually, but I was in a game one time where our game master tried really hard to make accents and things and make the people feel like they were different. But we kind of ran into this problem where everyone kind of sounded slightly Russian all the time, because it was really kind of the only accent that this person could put on. So then everyone was kind of slightly Russian, and that's fine. Like sometimes you can't do voices, and that's totally fine. I'm not going to shame any game master for that, but it would have been helpful too if these people also had some other kind of quirk or something to identify them, because we often started sort of slipping on their names, and like everyone just became like, you know, Yuri or something, that we just sort of, the Russian guy that we talked to said this thing. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to jump over here again. I'm back in the corner. I'm down over here. You see me? I'm right here. So we're talking again about we're actually going to work with the Cross of Coronado story that we were writing last time, the adventure that we were making last time. And if you don't remember that, here, I'll just jump to the notes on Scrivener so you can see what we were talking about. Oop, that's the summary. There's the notes. We're talking about this sort of objective that the players are looking for, the Cross of Coronado, in some sort of south of Fort Morris, Texas, in the Alamo, somewhere in what would be the Gulf of Mexico, but is now a big dry desert. So that's what we were making last time, and we got some people that were following along with us when we were doing that. But essentially, they're out there looking for this Cross of Coronado, which has some corruption and grants them a special ability, but then also slowly turns them into slowly makes their body the vessel for the spirit of Coronado. So we have a cult that's involved, the Cult of Coronado, and they have a fortification out there in this area, and we just have this Caribbean sort of place. And then we decided that potentially, if we were going to go with the Maximum Apocalypse version of this same monster, the Spirit of Coronado, that it would be actually like Nyarlathotep from the Cthulhu mythos, but in like it's a different form, right? Because the Nyarlathotep can take on many forms, and if you've like paid attention at all to like Call of Cthulhu, they address that in the Monstrous Maleficarum, or whatever the name of their monster manual is, and that sort of addresses the fact that these monsters potentially have different forms. Nyarlathotep specifically, because Nyarlathotep is a devious evil character, as it were, but Nyarlathotep has appeared in the Lovecraftian stories in a couple of different forms, and so for the creature we're talking about, that would be easy enough for us to utilize. So we have this idea that potentially the Spirit of Coronado is actually Nyarlathotep. We haven't quite addressed that in the writing of the adventure so far. So far, it is legitimately the Spirit of Coronado, but it could very well be, if you wanted to put a twist on it, the true form is Nyarlathotep. And that would lead us into using the Maximum Apocalypse rules, and we would take that off because there's rules for the Dark Pharaoh version of Nyarlathotep in the Maximum Apocalypse rules, because that is not something that we have to run into conflicts of sort of IP and conflicts of copyright. But anyway, the types of NPCs that you will generally encounter in a story, there's a couple of different types. You basically have background NPCs that are NPCs who are the set dressing for a particular place. This is like all the people inside the saloon, right, or inside the bar, inside the survival camp or whatever. These are people whose whole purpose is to make it feel like they're in the background, that there's something going on. These are workers, tradesmen, things like that. So there's background NPCs. You have plot necessary NPCs. Like if they go into a saloon, there's going to necessarily be a bartender, unless you want it to be a ghost town, in which case there's no bartender. But more than likely, if they're going to go into a saloon or some other location, there's going to be someone who's there that needs to be there, just because it wouldn't make sense if they weren't. Like if you're playing a game where, not necessarily Maximum Apocalypse or Few and Curse, but if you're playing a game where there's a police station, for example, and they go in, there's going to be a booking sergeant or someone at the desk that will be like, hey, what's going on while you're walking into a police station? If you go into a bank, there's going to be tellers, things like that. So there's going to be necessary necessary NPCs, which may still be background, but plot necessary NPCs we're talking about are NPCs that are necessary for the plot to make sense. And these are usually people that are affected, victims of the monsters or whatever, people who have information about what's happening. Or potentially people that'll be helpful to the players, or whatever. So you essentially have those kinds, and then you have adversarial NPCs. These are NPCs that are essentially the bad guys, and those don't necessarily need to be the focus of your adventure, but they're going to exist if you have adversaries. If you have kobolds, right, that are attacking a village, then you're going to have kobolds, right? That's going to be a thing. If you have kobolds attacking a village, then probably some plot necessary characters would be the villagers, right, that are being affected. They're both background and plot necessary because at least one of them is probably going to approach the players and be like, yo, my town's under attack. Oh, hell, my family's burning. Whatever the case is. So you have these plot necessary NPCs, but you also have the adversarial NPCs that are like the kobolds. In our case, for the adventure that we were writing for the Cross of Coronado, we have the assassin in the sands that attacks the players to sort of drive them forward. We have the guards of the fortification for the Cross of Coronado, and then we have the Coronado himself, like the spirit of Coronado inside the cross, who has affected a person, and therefore the leader of this cult of Coronado is in fact the spirit of Coronado, or potentially Nalarhotep, right? So I'll go ahead and add Nalarhotep to this list because we talked about the fact that it might be Nalarhotep, because I didn't spell it right last time. Nalarhotep. Yep, there we go. And so we have these kinds of NPCs. But the main thing is that you'll have background NPCs, you have plot necessary NPCs, and you have adversarial NPCs. And the adversarial NPCs we'll cover a little bit later. But let's talk about background NPCs. So background NPCs, they're the people pushing wagons in the background. They're the people that are moving rocks. They're the people that are basically unaffected by whatever the players are doing, whatever's going on in the world around them. And so they don't need a lot of work necessarily to sort of work out. But you have, you kind of want to have something for them. Like, what do they look like? So when you talk about NPCs, you've basically got like 3 roles that an NPC is going to provide. They're either going to be set dressing, as in the case of background NPCs most of the time. They're going to provide information to you or to your players for whatever reason. Maybe they know, there be kobolds in them hills or whatever. And then you have the ones that provide support. That's essentially going to be like the roles. Oh, and then you have adversarial, right, which is another role. They're going to be fighting. They're going to be a barrier to the players. So that's 4. But when you talk about positive ones, you're not really talking about the adversarial ones. You're not talking about barriers to the players getting their goal. You're basically talking about informational, background, set dressing, or support, right? And those are the things you're going to be talking about. So these background NPCs that we may want for this adventure. So we know that this thing is going to take place, first starting off at the Alamo and then pushing them out into the sands. We don't have any settlements that they're in necessarily anywhere in the adventure, so we don't need to worry about bartenders, random people in the street, the blacksmith shoeing a horse or whatever the case is. We don't need to worry about any of those guys if we were talking about our specific adventure, but you might in the case of other things. So, for example, the RPG Explorer Society, I have that adventure. I've put them into a town called New Jing, and so I had to create all these background NPCs for New Jing to make it feel like it's a real city. So what I did was I have the guards of the wall that protects the city, and there's really no reason to really worry about those guys except for the fact that they protect the wall, and so there's really only like 2 of those that they interacted with, and therefore the rest of them are basically just background. All of the people hanging out at the gates trying to get in to the city, those were all background NPCs. None of them mattered. I just had to give some basic descriptions of them. And then when they were walking around the town, there were a few like workers and tradesmen that they ran into that they didn't really talk to, and those are just all for setting. There was a city hall with like a library, and there was just some people that worked there, some volunteers, and then a large burly person that paid them for some of their time reorganizing books. Those are all still background NPCs. Those are not plot necessary NPCs. But then they went into the saloon, the High Five Saloon, and there they met the bartender. They met a bunch of people. There was a bunch of people standing around. There was a bunch of entertainment women that were waiting around that were bored. Those are all background NPCs. And then they met the bartender, who was kind of a plot necessary NPC because he had to sort of talk to them about what was going on, and they had to interact with him quite a bit. But he was also supposed to stall them until eventually one of the city council members, known as Bill the Dingo McAllister, he showed up. And Bill the Dingo McAllister is a plot necessary NPC. So the bartender sort of borders that line between a background NPC and a plot necessary NPC, but the Dingo definitely was a plot necessary NPC because his role was to provide them support. His role was to show up and go ahead and like take them to where the city council is waiting to meet them. So there's these things, and I'll just use this screen to sort of talk about them. There's the type of NPC that they are, the role that they play in the adventure, and then what they're doing. So activities is the next thing. NPCs have to be doing something, right? Like the bartender isn't just standing in the bar in the saloon waiting for people to come in. If you ever walk into a bar at any point, you know that it's busy doing stuff. Have you ever like had a place where you worked there and your boss was always like, well, at least look like you're busy? I mean, that's kind of what goes on in reality. So your NPCs have to be doing something. They're usually, it's going to be some kind of trade. It's going to be providing for their family. It's going to be interacting with the environment, that kind of stuff. And then potentially being barriers to the objective. And that doesn't mean that they're adversarial. That just means like maybe there's like a barrier. So an example might be a bunch of townsfolk that are really kind of frustrated or whatever, and they don't want the players to leave, or I don't know. So in Maximum Apocalypse, you might have a place where everyone's in a survival situation, and you have this like survival town, and these adversarial. These barrier non-adversarial NPCs might be like the people in town, the guards of the town who don't really want anyone to leave because it could cause problems. Think of like the guards for like The Walking Dead, the guards that sit along the edges of the governor's area, right? And they don't want people to come and go because that would cause problems for them. So therefore they try not to let people leave. It's not that they're necessarily saying you can't leave and we'll shoot you if you try. It's more like we're just acting as a barrier to have some role play to explain why you're trying to leave the town. So you have some things like that. So these NPCs are going to be doing stuff in the background, and you have to think about what is the NPC going to do in the background. Now, in the case of our Alamo ghosts, right, they're just fighting a war with the other ghosts, right? And you essentially have like Alamo soldiers, like the American soldiers fighting, and then you have like Mexican soldiers fighting, and you have like these various different things, maybe Native Americans fighting. But you basically have a bunch of ghosts that are just actively doing some kind of war that doesn't affect the NPC, but they're in the background, right? They're just doing background stuff. But you need to keep track of that because you want to make them feel real. So you never want an NPC that's just standing there, a garlic farmer standing outside of his shop waiting for players to walk up, unless that's the role of that particular NPC. If the role of the NPC is to sit there in front of the shop and wait for the players to show up and then give them information, okay, I'll roll with it, but it's probably going to be really boring. You should probably figure out something that they're doing. And what I've done in the past, what I've liked to do is essentially do this thing where I put like the whole day. So this really works for sandboxy type adventures or scenarios where you basically have like, you put like, morning, afternoon, evening or something like that, and you just have these 3 blocks, and then you just move the NPCs around depending on where they're at. So like an NPC is probably not going to be standing in front of their shop in the middle of the night, right? They're probably going to be at home sleeping. And so you can sort of move them around, be like, all right, in the morning they're outside of their shop. In the afternoon they're having dinner with their family or friends. They're out playing, racquetball or something. And then you put them in the evening, like at home, right, or something like that, which then also allows the players to think of something like, if I wanted to break into the bank, I'm probably not going to do it in the middle of the day, right? I'm probably going to wait till nighttime when all of the tellers are at home. Now, that seems like an easy thing to plot, but sometimes when you have a lot of moving parts, then you might want to do that. I did an adventure, I can't remember what it was called right now, but, When the Leaf Withers on the Vine, that's what it was called. It's a Call of Cthulhu adventure, and in that adventure, there's all of these NPCs, and they're all kind of like in locations, but it didn't make sense for me for them all to be in the locations that they're at all the time, so I did my own little like spreadsheet tracker and just moved them around as I felt that they would be, and then that meant that, like, for example, the players going into the saloon thing in the evening would run into the sheriff there rather than running into the sheriff outside of the sheriff station / jail, right? So that was like the kind of thing that I did, but not on every day. So I didn't just put them always in the saloon at night, but I would do like every other day they were in the saloon at night. So I did track the week as well. And so then the players walking around trying to solve this mystery would run into these different players in different places. Like the blacksmith may not be in the blacksmith's area if it's Sunday, right? They may be at church, like that kind of thing. So you want to give them activities that they're doing in the background to make them feel real. That's one thing to do. And then when you're making your NPCs, think about their goals and motivations. If they have their own things that they're doing, what are their goals and motivations? Now, again, for background NPCs, you don't need to go this deep into detail. You just need a name, a job, and a goal, right, essentially. And that's really what you're working on because they're just in the background. You don't even need names, right? You just be like the type that they are and what they're doing, and that's really all you need for background NPCs. So we're really talking kind of about plot necessary NPCs or NPCs that you want to make feel real. You could do this for every single NPC, and that's totally fine. But like you'd probably burn yourself out writing for all of the people standing outside the gate. But an easy thing might be to do, all of you outside of the gate will use one set of things. They're background NPCs. Their role is to be standing around at the gate and block the players from necessarily necessarily just walking through the gate, and what they're doing is standing around trying to talk to the guards, and their motivation is to get in, right? That's easy enough. And then you just have like a whole crowd of people that have that exact same thing. And that's what you'll do for background. And then you have this sort of what feels real people hanging out outside of a gate, right? It's that simple. Same thing if you're in a bustling town, you probably do the same thing for the streets. For the Cyberpunk for Beta Red, I do this a lot, where I'll be like, there's just people walking the street. Where are they going? They're going to meet a friend, and therefore are in a hurry. And so, like, what role do they play? To push the players around, like physically push them around, and not actually be an adversary, but just to like bump into them. And then, like, their goal is to get to where they're going relatively quickly, and they're not going to let the players just, like, walk past them because they're all in a hurry as well. And so you have this thing where, like, players trying to walk down the street, and they just get bumped around, and this just makes it feel like a real city. Now, when you get into the NPCs, when you have their motivations and what they're doing, you might want to ask, what is their relationship to the players? It kind of goes back to what we were talking about for the types of NPCs. An adversarial NPC is obviously going to be adversarial. A plot necessary NPC, probably not, but maybe they are, depending on how you want to play it. Background NPC, don't have to worry about the relationship with players. They don't matter. They're set dressing. They're essentially the same as a stage. They're a light on the stage, and so you don't need to worry about their relationship per se, but you might need to keep track of it if the players decide that they're going to try to grab somebody off the street and talk to them. So that's the thing. So the relationship. So for that one, we generally use, and I'm going to see if I can pull it up real fast and like, I don't know if I can share it, but anyway, and maybe I'll just grab the core rules, the Maximum Apocalypse core rules. If you are going to be using this relationship situation, then what we do have in Maximum Apocalypse, and it does also translate over into the Few and Cursed, is the amiability spectrum. It's this page that I am now showing you, and I'm just making sure it comes up on the screen. There's an amiability spectrum for social interactions with characters, and this amiability spectrum is very useful for tracking where the players or the NPCs are in relationship to the players, because it allows them to sort of determine whether they're angry, irate, friendly, etc. That there's the kind of thing exists in other places too. I'm not the person who came up with it. I just borrowed some ideas, but essentially you would use that to keep track of where the players are in relation to that person. So that's where this relationship comes in. Most of the time, you're gonna be like the NPCs are gonna be neutral, right? They don't care about the players. They don't know the players. If you're in a place where maybe they shouldn't be there, then they're obviously gonna be a little bit on the irate side or the angry side. For example, if the players walk into a bandit camp and can't prove that they're bandits, right, or something, they're just like strangers who've walked in. Maybe this town is just one big cult, and these strangers have walked in. Then they're probably going to be on the angry side. They're not going to be neutral per se, because they do have some feelings about these strangers that come in, and that's something you can play around with if you're using this relationship map. You can use this amiability spectrum for Few and Cursed or for Maximum Apocalypse to give a feel to an area. But you also might want to do that for the NPCs that are plot necessary or adversarial. Adversarial ones you're just going to assume are on the bad side, right? Maybe. But maybe there's one that isn't. Like, for example, The Golden Child. Very interesting movie. One of those movies that I watched as a kid that was formulaic in determining my eventual growth when it comes to story writing. But there's a character in that who starts off as a bad guy, gets touched by the Golden Child, and becomes not an adversary anymore. So that person is now a support NPC. They're a plot necessary support NPC who's there to help the player. In this case, Eddie Murphy's character. But like that changes, so they're no longer on the angry or irate or like enemy stage, enraged level of amiability. This character is actually not is now on the friendly level of the amiability, which does change things up. So that might be something you track. Maybe there's one guard in here who actually doesn't agree with the cult and has decided that they don't want to be in the cult of Coronado anymore, and so they're actually not neutral toward the player, but actually on the friendly side. Maybe they're kind of a secret ally, right? So you would want to determine the relationship of the NPC toward the players. And then, to make them seem real, you kind of want to do a quirk. And I say that you kind of want to do a quirk because it isn't really necessary, but it is really helpful for you to keep track of them, but also for the players to track who they're talking to. So quirks, that's what Guy Sklanders calls it. I call it quirk works for me. That works fine, but it's the kind of thing that makes them different. What makes them different and distinguishes them from the other NPCs that the players have interacted with so far. So you obviously have physical descriptions, right? Those are things. But other quirks that work for me are things like cadence and speaking style. Do they have a southern accent? Do they speak another language and therefore use like a couple of words in English? What is their speaking style? And that's where you get into the thing about everyone sounding Russian, or in the case of Few and Curse, where everybody sounds like they're a Texan, that kind of thing. But then you have a twitch or a verbal tick. I like using that that sort of thing because I just got a message. So I like using that sort of thing because it allows me to remember what the character does and is like. Sorry, I'm just responding to the message. Okay, it's kind of related to what we're doing, but kind of not. I was talking about the Kickstarter. But it helps me remember what the players are or what the character was doing, and therefore make them slightly different. So, for example, there have been times where I've used the same sort of accent or speaking style for a particular NPC that the players call, and then I remembered, okay, this guy is somewhat, vaguely French, right? And so when the players call them, they're going to be still vaguely French or vaguely Swedish or, something. Or like every time they answer the phone, they answer it the yellow, right? Like that kind of thing. And so then they know they're saying, oh, I'm going to call Bob again. And then I go, okay, cool. The phone rings for a little bit, and then the phone answers, and you hear yellow. And they're like, hey, Bob, right? And then they jump right into it, and we can continue going on. Or if somebody's like a mobster, like an Italian mobster, they're going to sound like an Italian mobster. Or they're from New Jersey, they're going to sound like they're from New Jersey. That's one thing I like to do. But like the reason why the twitch and verbal tick comes in is because with that aspect, you can add little things. So an example is that Japanese people, this is actually a thing that I learned when I was in Japan. Japanese people will sometimes make this little sound before they speak when they're sort of acknowledging that it's their turn to speak. So they might be like, asa, hai, wakatta, right? And they make this sort of noise. They go, and that's something that they do, and they all do it. So you would be able to use that sort of thing to great effect if you create a verbal tick when you're using a character that has this sort of thing, and then it distinguishes them from the others with this twitch that they do whenever they're talking, or this like verbal thing that they do. Saying like I have a friend who constantly says and that's their thing. And so we always know when that person is going to give a speech that we're going to hear a lot of ums. So that's how these verbal tics are my favorite, because you don't have to try to remember very much. You just have to write down in your notes that this person has this verbal tic, and then you just try to use it as much as possible. And then another thing is a signature item or style. So NPCs have, you want them to feel real. So you do something like they wear hoodies all the time, or they have a hat that's backwards or something. This is a signature style. But one thing that I like to do is a signature thing. For example, in Shinkansen Shuffle for Beta Red, there's an NPC that the players interact with that always offers the first 2 human characters that approach the table a stimsig. Now, not all of them, just the first 2. And this person also then smokes their own stimsig. So this person, whenever they interact with them, this person offers a stimsig and then smokes their own. And this is a cool little signature thing about the NPC that you can remember, so that like later if they're like, oh, I'm going to buy stimsigs for our NPC, then you remember, okay, that person has stimsigs. So this is these kinds of things are ways that you can distinguish the NPC from other NPCs. So that's one ways. The RPG Explorer Society, perfect. Another example from the RPG Explorer Society for the Few and Cursed game that we've run. There's a guy who is on the city council, is Bill the Dingo McAllister. Bill the Dingo McAllister has the signature look of the Kentucky waterfall kind of thing, with his beard. But then he also talks with like a higher, like a Texan accent with a southern drawl, but a little bit higher voice, and so he's a little bit more like sounding friendly versus like, the real partner, we're doing that. He's not like that. He's more like a, well, howdy there, partner, like that kind of thing. And so this is something I wrote down for him so that he would sound different from some of the other southern drawling NPCs that they'd encountered. So he has this sort of distinguishing feature, the signature style with him. He also doesn't wear hats, which is kind of uncommon since he, is kind of a cowboy. So these are the kinds of things that you can do to make your NPCs have like this sort of quirk that makes them different. And then the last thing that you usually do is like, what name do they have? I know we've all run into the situation where the players decide to talk to a background NPC and they're like, oh, what is this farmhand's name? Or what is this miner's name? What is this person's name? And you just have to pull it out of thin air. Kevin. They're named Kevin, right? It's like, oh, we're in Tokyo and they're named Kevin. Yep. They're named Kevin in Tokyo. We've all run into that situation before. And so when you're planning out NPCs, when you have background NPCs, like you usually don't pick out names. They're just a background, so it's like a whole group of people, the townsfolk, right? But it would be helpful if you think that they're going to become a plot necessary or they're going to border that plot necessary NPC level, if you think that the players are going to interact with them, to kind of have some names set up. And when it comes to plot necessary or adversarial NPCs, yeah, having a name is very good. So for the Alamo Ghosts, if we were working with our adventure, now that I've talked about the kinds of things that we do when we create NPCs, the whole goal of this is just to make your NPCs seem real. The Alamo Ghosts are background NPCs, right? These are background NPCs. They are not necessary for the plot. They're in the background. They're fighting a war. Their role is to push the players into the rest of the story, which makes them almost set dressing, but almost set their background. Well, I already wrote that their background. They're kind of plot necessary. They're to provide plot push, is what we'll say. Right? That's what their job is, or that's what their role is in the adventure, the reason they exist in the adventure at all, because if they don't have a role, if they don't have a role that they're filling, if they're not doing something for the plot, then why do we have them at all? And then what are they doing? They're fighting a war. So that's what they do. And then at sunrise or whatever, they disappear. And then they come back again at nightfall. Something. Their motivation. This is where we get, because their background, we don't really necessarily need to come up with a motivation for them. They're just doing their thing. But let's say that their goal is to win the war. And this is both sides. They're all trying to win this endless war. Their relationship to the players is neutral. They honestly do not care about the players. They're not adversarial and they're not supportive. But we might put a little caveat. Will become adversarial. So using the amiability spectrum, we'll say, would they become irate, which is the next. So irate is the first level. Double checking. Angry is the first level. So irate would be second level. Let's do it. Will become angry with the PCs if they intervene in the war. So there we go. Quirk is that they don't speak. They just fight. So now we've got them a little different, and they're dressed in the sort of Daniel Boone style dress. And we don't need a name for them, but we'll call them Alamo Soldiers anyway. There we go. Okay, so the assassin in the sand that the players encounter somewhere in the adventure, in the midpoint of the adventure or so, the inciting incident, as it were. That is the inciting moment, right? Let me double check. Sandstorm. Okay, the sandstorm is the attack. The attack from... Oh, no, that's where it is. Sandstorm, cultist in the storm, right there. So the cultist in the storm is in the inciting incident. So... the type of character the assassin in the sand is an adversarial NPC. In fact, let's go over here. So we've got the background NPCs. We know that the... let's fill this up. We know that the Alamo soldiers are background NPCs. Alamo ghosts. And then we know that the assassin is both plot necessary and adversarial. So we'll just go ahead and go plot necessary assassin. And we'll delete him from the assassin from the adversarial category. And then we have the guards, Coronado, and potentially Nalhotep, right? And there we are. Don't usually talk so much when I'm working. I usually just do the things in my head. But we'll go ahead and make note that this is a plot necessary NPC. And who is also adversarial, right? The role that they play is to drive the players to the fortification and give players information about the Cult of Coronado. Now, here's an interesting thing that you can do here. This role will actually go like this. We'll just delete this because they're gonna end up with a fortification anyway. So the goal of this NPC is to give information to players about the Cult of Coronado. Now, there are two ways to go about that. You can have the NPC expressly tell the players the information that you want them to have. Perhaps they give it away through interrogation. Perhaps they just give it away because that's what they do. But they're not. This NPC is not here to provide support. In fact, this NPC is not even here to cause damage. This NPC is legitimately plot necessary to sort of push the players toward the end goal and get them toward the Cult of Coronado. So we know that they're actually going to be a providing information type NPC, which is a different thing to say. Like you think, oh, well, they're an assassin. They're not going to be talking or whatever, but that's their role. So we want them to do that. We don't really care that the assassin is an assassin. We just want to make sure that the assassin gives us the information we need. Now, the players will respond, obviously, to an assassin by trying to defend themselves. They will fight the assassin. So we know that there's a chance that this providing information NPC will die. So how do you handle that? Well, the answer is simple. Information doesn't have to be given via verbal means, right? You could have something like they kill the assassin, and on the assassin's person, they find like these weird insignia and stuff indicating that they're part of some kind of religious group or something. Or perhaps they have a letter, right, from the or for. Maybe they're delivering a message to the head of the cult, and so it'll indicate where they were going and who they were trying to go to. And it'll say something like, Dear Coronado, we found another cursed object out in the wood or out in the sands. Would you like us to bring it to your fortification, or would you like us to leave it, right? Like that kind of thing. Just something simple. And so you know that now there's like Coronado and there's a fortification, and this person was obviously part of that group. And then when the sand lets up, they're right outside this fortification or nearby this fortification, and they go, that must be the fortification that was mentioned in the letter. That kind of thing. So you have this opportunity to use this NPC to provide information verbally to the players or through some other means, right? Like their job is to give information. So how they do that is really kind of, up to what happens with the players. But as long as the information is provided. Now, this is where Call of Cthulhu sometimes gets it wrong. And I love Call of Cthulhu, but sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes the Call of Cthulhu only offers one avenue for them to find out information. And maybe that's the kind of thing you want to do. Maybe you want them to keep the assassin alive instead of killing the assassin. And therefore, if they kill the assassin, they just won't have the information they're looking for. Maybe you want to do that, in which case you can, because there's a reason for that too. Maybe that you don't want them to know anything about this Cult of Coronado, and you want them to be completely surprised when they stumble across it. Okay, if that's how you want to play it. Just recognize that for this particular plan, we've chosen to say that this role of this assassin in the sands is not to kill the players or to injure them in any way, but to provide them information. So that's what we want it to do, whether it's based on the body or whatnot. That's what we want. A good example is that I have an NPC, or another example. I won't say a good example. I'm just not toot my own horn here. But there's an example that I use in The Haunting of Millibrand Manor. There's an NPC called Madame Bovary, who's the sort of charlatan spirit medium that does the seance in the story. And her whole purpose is to provide information for the players. Her job is not to do the seance and have crazy stuff happen. That's just part of the story. That's going to happen regardless of whether this particular NPC is doing it or not, because that's the story. But when most of the information they get from this Madame Bovary happens after she dies, and then there's like searching the body, and that provides medical information, which helps lead to the eventually figuring out what's going on. She has a journal that she leaves behind, so all these things sort of happen after she dies. So this NPC is still providing information, but they're not providing the information necessarily by telling everybody what they know, right? So the thing to know with the assassin in the sands is that the assassin can in fact be providing information even if they're dead. So what is the assassin doing before and around with the players? Like, what are they doing that is outside of the players at all? They're scouting. Maybe. They may be, right? We mentioned that they may be delivering a message. So we'll write delivering message. That's how, if they die, then the reason why the players are able to gain information from bodies because they find the message, the letter tucked in the assassin's jacket or whatever. And they're trying to get home, and we'll say they're lost in the sands. So that's what they're doing. They're doing these things. What are they scouting? I'll just go scouting. That's what they're doing when the players sort of interact with them. They're not just waiting in the sands for the players to come along, and then they're going to jump out and stab them in the back. The goal and motivation of the assassin in the sands, well, kill the players, right? That's one. Maybe it's get back to the cult. Yeah, so that's good. Okay, so we've got some motivations. They're trying to get back to the cult, or if they're delivering a message. I kind of like this idea. I'm sort of attached to this idea of delivering a message. Deliver message. So that's what they're doing. That's what their motivation is, to get these things done. Their motivation is essentially to accomplish a task. Right? That's what we're talking about. Kill the player, get back to the cult, deliver message. They're trying to accomplish a task. And so that's what they're doing. In simple terms, is they're trying to accomplish a task, and that task will involve them getting back to the cult, right? So we'll go ahead and say killing the players is just secondary to protecting the cult. So we'll say kill the players is protecting the cult. Which does mean that they don't necessarily want to kill the players. So we'll actually, let's actually go like this. Let's put the kill the players in parentheses. And we'll say that it's actually protecting the cult. So that way we have now an avenue for the players to interact with this NPC, because the NPC isn't necessarily trying to kill the players. They're just trying to protect the cult. They're trying to get back to the cult, deliver their message, and protect the cult from any outsiders, right? So now if the players decide that they're not going to kill this assassin in the sands, and they're going to try to talk to them, well, now we have an avenue for why. If the assassin determines that the players are not evil and going to kill off the cult, then they'll talk to them. At least presumptively think that they're going to not kill off the cult, then they'll talk to them. And now we have this interaction that is a little bit less adversarial, right? So if the players use their charm thing and sort of convince this person that they're not going to kill the cult, then we can move them on that amiability spectrum from like angry over to like a neutral side, right? So that leads me to the relationship question. What is the relationship between the players and our assassin in the sands? Well, I'm going to assume that it's angry, only because an outsider would be an outsider, and this person is protecting outsiders, or protecting the cult against outsiders. And it wouldn't be neutral, right? Because we have this in-group, out-group thing. So whenever you have an in-group, out-group thing, where you have like a survivor colony and they are not accepting new people, then you will have an in-group, out-group. And when you have an in-group, out-group, you are going to have the in-group be friendly, right? Essentially, they're going to be maybe not necessarily friendly, maybe just trade on our amiability spectrum. They're, at least accepting of that person. And then you'll have the opposite side. You'll have them be angry for the out-group. You will not have neutral people if you have an in-group, out-group, because you can't be neutral and have an in-group, out-group. That's just not how it works, because inherently, out-group people are people you don't like. If they were people you liked, you wouldn't have an in-group, right? So this is sort of my point here. But you maybe you have something like an in-group, out-group situation, but then a neutral trade ground, in which case then they might be neutral. So an example might be like a group of people that are solitary and isolated away from everyone because they don't like the world, right? Like they just don't like people in the world. They don't want to interact with worldly things, let's say, like this cult. But they're not necessarily adversarial toward people who are in the world. They're just doing their own thing. Like say like the Amish, for example. Like they're doing their own thing, and they're not necessarily thinking that everyone else out there in the world is evil, right? Well, maybe they are, but my point. I'm not making any assumptions about the Amish. I'm just saying that maybe they don't necessarily think everyone else is bad. They just have their group that's like, we're trying to do something special over here. And so then they come into town to trade with people. And in that case, they are neutral, right? They're not out-group people, so they're just neutral people. So that might be a situation where they might be neutral. But in the case of our Cult of Coronado and the assassin who's a member of the Cult of Coronado, it's definitely in-group, out-group. Because Coronado's group is trying to protect this cross, and any outsider is a threat to that particular cursed object being where it's supposed to be and doing what it's supposed to do. So we have in-group, out-group, in which case our NPC is going to be angry. So that's how they start off. But maybe we have it set so that if the players succeed on a charm skill roll, they can move this immediately to friendly, perhaps. Maybe. This is probably neutral, but we'll just write this down as a maybe. I'm going to write maybe, because I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing. But they would definitely move to neutral, because that's how the rules work. So in Maximum Apocalypse and the Few and Cursed, when you have a social interaction with somebody, you have a couple ways you can do it. You can use Charm, you can use Intimidate. Those are really the two ways. If they're an animal, you can use Animal Ken, and if you want to really push it, you can use Interrogate. But Interrogate's job is slightly different from Charm and Intimidate. I'll get into that in a second. But Charm and Intimidate essentially do the same thing. You put your social skills into trying to convince, like all of your stats, into trying to convince someone to do a thing for you. Whether that's provide information, or give you an item, whatever the case is, surrender, whatever the case is, you want them to do a thing for you. And in both of those things will say that whether or not you accomplish that. Now, they can resist with their own resolve thing, but But the point is that those are what you use to convince someone to do something for you. Charm is obviously a positive way to do it. So at the end of that interaction, they're going to think better of you because you've charmed them into doing it for you. They're not going to hate you afterwards. They're going to be on the positive side. And then maybe later, if you don't pay attention to them, they slip back into the other direction where they were going, back toward neutral, essentially, or cross that threshold and maybe they don't like you. Versus Intimidate, where when you accomplish the task, when they do the thing that you want them to do, they actually move the other direction, where they move toward the enraged side of the spectrum, and so they move toward being they'll become angry, then irate, etc. So both of those skills will be useful. So I'm basically just re-explaining how the rules of the charm skill work. But yeah, so the relationship will automatically be angry, and then of course if they try to intimidate this person, then they will push them toward irate and then enraged. But the interrogate skill comes in because you can interrogate somebody, and what that actually does is that doesn't actually affect their amiability level. You can torture somebody all day long, apparently, according to our rules, but what it does do is it breaks down their resolve, so that each success on that interrogate roll drops their resolve, and you can do that multiple times until eventually their resolve gets to 0 or whatever. In which case, when you do the charm or intimidate skill, then that will cause the person to have a lower threshold for trying to resist. So they'll probably fail, and then your charm will work. So you have the good cop, bad cop situation. Somebody sort of interrogate the crap out of someone, and then the next person walks in and goes, if you just give us the information, we can make all this go away. And then roll the charm, bam, now that person is charmed. And they say, oh yeah, you know what, I'm more friendly towards you now, let me give you some information that you were looking for. And then you might run into this thing where that person is now convinced that the players are really good people, despite the fact that they've been tortured by them. So that's a thing. But anyway, so we have this assassin in the sands as a angry person, and then we're going to give them a quirk. What quirk do we want to give them? Well, I don't think it should be a physical thing. I don't think it should be it could be a physical description thing, but I don't think it should be like a limp or something. Maybe they have buggy eyes. Actually, let's do a physical thing. Let's go buggy eyes. Let's say that. And I mean like literal grasshopper-like eyes. They just have weird mutation eyes. So we'll go like this. We'll go mutation. So we have this physical mutation that will obviously make them mutation. I did that right. Which will obviously make them stand out when the players start talking to this assassin. because they will be different, and maybe these eyes do like a little like twitchy thing or something that we can utilize to make them seem weird and different. And their name. This is always the hard one because names you can come up with. I try to stick to gender neutral names. I've been using up a lot of gender neutral names, so I can't really think of a gender neutral one I haven't used. I can think of some that I have used, but I kind of want to use them again, or I want to, but I want to use them in the future, so I don't want to use them like Quinn, for example. I want Quinn. Quinn sounds good, but I also want Quinn to be an NPC, or not an NPC, a pre-generated character. So... oh, man. Let's just go with George. Let's go with George like that. Because then this person could be Jorge or George, right? All right, so we'll do that. All right, so now we have our assassin. We have the basics for our assassin in the sand, so we'll have something to work with for the adventure, and we'll go ahead and we'll eventually slot this in to the adventure itself so that we can let the game master, whoever runs this, know that these are the kinds of things we came up with. We'll write it out a little differently, but there we are. Now, for the guards, we're doing a whole group. Same with the cultists of Coronado. We're doing a whole group, so we'll just kind of like, we'll skip the names. Unless we want to just have like a list of names, right? And that's something we could do. Actually, let's leave that. Let's put it back. And what we're going to do instead, what we're going to do instead is we're going to have a list of names. Oh, yeah, I forget that in Scrivener you can't really, there we go. We'll just have names like Hector, Victor, bunch of or names. Andy, Tom, like that. Okay, so we've got a few guard names that we can utilize. We don't need to be specific on who's who. All right, so these are, these are adversarial NPCs. And their role is to be a barrier to the players, right? Their job is to keep the players from getting into the fortification easily. But we also decided that maybe they can get in anyway, so these guards are going to be more like roving guards. So I'll go ahead and write that. They're not going to be sitting on the wall unless you want them to be sitting on the wall, but that's your business, not mine. So these are roving guards. They are adversarial. Their job is to be a barrier. Their job is to force the players into doing some skill action, whether that's take them down with an attack action or go all stealthy and hide from them. I would like to add that since they're a barrier, that maybe they go down in a single attack, and we don't really give them a whole lot of HP. We just give them just enough HP to exist, essentially. So they'll have like 1 hit point, and they go down. So that would make these guys they're kind of like mooks or something, or henchmen. I don't want to use henchmen because I use henchmen some other place for a different thing. Mooks are goons. Yeah. All right, so we'll call them goons, right? They're basically, their job is to be a thing that causes the players to have to jump around a little bit, and then that's what sort of does it. Okay. So their activities, they are going to be walking around the interior, or the exterior and interior of the fortification. Man, it is too early for me. And their goal is to protect the cult. Protect the cult and worship. Well, I'll just say protect cult. And we'll say be faithful. This matters because if the players were to capture them, then they're going to be faithful to their vows to the cult, and they're probably not just going to give up information, regardless of how well the players try to convince them that they're good. They're just not going to do it because these guys, their whole job is to protect the cult, versus this assassin who was potentially just a messenger who stumbled across the players. Starting to look more and more like that as we continue to go. And then their relationship to the players will obviously be irate, which does affect how well the players can try to convince them to do stuff. This is 2 degrees of success required to convince them to do a thing. Yeah, or double disadvantage or something like that. So, they're gonna have this difficulty trying to convince these guys to do something for them because they're guards. That is their purpose. And so we put that relationship like that. So if someone tries to do some social challenge toward them, that sort of throws it off. You can do that with any kind of chart where you use to track the level of like relationship with the players. There's many people that have many charts. Some people will be like, oh, you add I mean, in D&D, it's like real easy. You just do like this chart where you basically just go like, -1 for, like you just kind of make it like, okay, you put like neutral somewhere, and then you kind of go like -1 if they're angry at them, -2 if they're really angry at them, -3 if they're very angry at them, like that kind of thing. And then the players will make their roll, their D20 roll with their own like social motivator or their social modifiers, and then you just sort of drop that back down based on how irate that person is or whatever. That's a way to do it, but essentially you sort of put this in there to make it semi-difficult to do the thing, like convince them to do the thing. There are quirks. Well, there's a bunch of them, so their quirks should be, let's make a group quirk. Let's make that they all smoke. They all smoke and spit. So they're all kind of these gruff, and then they'll be gruff with beards. How about that? Well, let's just go gruff. So there'll be these gruff dudes who smoke and spit and wear leather boots. Okay, so now we've got some physical and quirks that they have that will distinguish them. So whenever the players come across these guys roaming around the inside of the fortification, for example, they'll be smoking and spitting and being gruff. So now we've got that, and then like I said, because we have a group here that we're doing a roving group of guards, then we just have some names, just a couple names: Hector, Victor, Andy, and Tom. I made them all guys, it seems. So let's change this up. Well, Andy, we'll go like that, and then it could be anything, and then Tam, right? So now we've got 2 guys, 2 girls. That's fine. Equal opportunity guards for a place. And Tam could be a guy as well, depending on which culture it's from. So, we'll go like that. So we just got a couple of options for, like I said, trying to do gender neutral names, but then I screwed up and I couldn't think of any off the top of my head, aside from Quinn, which I plan to use for a pre-generated character, so I don't want to do that. All right. So that's how you work through that. So we'll do it again with the Cultists of Coronado. Once again, we're working with a group, so we'll have to think of group names instead of individual names, and that's what we'll do for that, but we'll get to that in a second. These guys are not going to be plot necessary. They're plot necessary in that they have to exist in order for the plot to make sense, but they're just not going to provide any services. So we'll call them somewhere between background / plot necessary NPCs. Because if you don't have them, if you just never bring them up, then the location's just where they live, quote unquote, and then it doesn't affect the plot story overall if they are around. So I wouldn't call them necessarily plot necessary, but they are necessary for the plot to make sense, right? So I guess they are kind of. So we'll put that border there, just like the bartender, where like they're almost plot necessary. If they go into a saloon, there's definitely going to need to be a bartender. Otherwise, why is there a saloon with a bunch of people in it if there's no bartender to give out the alcohol / water? All right, so the role that they provide, the role that the cultists provide, they don't provide information for our players. They are kind of set dressing. That's kind of what they are. They don't provide supports. I'll go with set dressing. I think set dressing makes sense. And then also a barrier. Okay. So that's what they do. We're going to use them, I think. We're going to use them to keep the players from rushing out of the fortification as soon as they obtain the Cross of Coronado. So we're going to use them as a barrier to getting out of the fortification, and what that will mean is that we're literally going to use them as hindering terrain. Well, we're gonna call them hindering terrain. They're going to be in the way, so they're hindering terrain. And so that's what these these cultists are gonna do. And actually, maybe they also skill challenge. They also make it so that the players have to use stealth skills and whatever all to like avoid people, or do some social challenges to try to convince them that they're not bad or whatever. And so they might provide this requirement for the players to make some skill challenges. Okay. This is good to note because like when we get to the midpoint, the lead in and the showdown, there's some bits that were missing, and I was like, this doesn't feel full enough. It doesn't feel like there's enough skill challenges and things. And now by adding these kinds of things, we're adding social challenges, skill challenges. So this is good. And I am treating NPCs like they're just barriers and not like they're people, essentially, because for the way that I write adventures, I talked about last time, there's this goal that the players are trying to get, and then everything that sort of keeps them from getting to it is essentially a barrier to that objective. And so in this case, these NPCs are all just barriers to the objective. And so we're treating these cultists of Coronado as actual barriers. They're hindering terrain, they're a skill challenge thing. So that's kind of what they are, and I find that to be a little bit funny that I'm using people as something that hinders the players from being able to escape the fortification after they've obtained the Cross of Coronado. What activities are doing? They're probably meditating and worshiping and like maybe eating. This is the kind of stuff that they'll be doing when they're inside the fortification, and their motivation is to support and uphold the leader, who is Coronado in human form, Spirit of Coronado, who has possessed a body. Right. So that's their goal. Their goal is to support and uphold this cult that they're part of. Their relationship to players would be not neutral, because we have the in-group, out-group thing that I discussed before. So they're going to have to be angry just at the base, because there's no reason why these cultists would be okay with a random group of strangers wandering into their fortification. There's just no way. There's an in-group, out-group thing, and so I know we're making like all of these NPCs like really evil, but I did mention that this guy over here is like angry but can become friendly if they convince him, and then the Alamogos are just absolutely neutral. Like they just don't care about the players at all. So it's not that every one of the NPCs in this adventure that we're writing is angry and trying to kill the players. This particular adventure, though, we didn't have a settlement or something for them to be in, so you're not going to have a bunch of friendly or allies sort of rolling around being really helpful for the players, because that's just not the adventure we've written so far. But that would be something you would do. Your NPCs shouldn't necessarily always be angry at the players, or neutral at best. You should have a few that are a little bit more friendly. A bartender, for example, is probably going to be more on the friendlier side, so they're going to at least be on the trade level, because they will at least work with the players and do stuff for them in exchange for something from the players, right? So that makes sense. But these ones are going to be angry, and then at best, they can become neutralized. If you wanted to play with it and allow there to be no limit, then you could have the players eventually convince the cultists to follow them. That's up to you. I'm going to leave it for this, though. I'm not really going to think of that, because while players might do that, this particular adventure, like we're trying to write this one shot, so it's going to be a little different. Quirks for them, we'll say that they all wear white robes. And another quirk, I don't know that we should do. I mean, it would be kind of funny to do it, but I don't know if we should. Maybe they all speak. They speak in rhymes, right? That could be a quirk. That would be creepy. That would be really creepy. And so we might do that. I have had 0 viewers, so this is going to be a bit weird to continue on, but we'll go on to the Spirit of Coronado. No one's had any questions, so let's see. The Spirit of Coronado is what type? That is an adversarial type, right? That is an adversarial NPC. In fact, if this were a campaign, this would essentially be our nemesis, right? And that's kind of what they are. They're the boss. So this is our nemesis. And they don't really have henchmen, though, so they're essentially the villains. We'll go with villain versus nemesis. There's like a layer that Guy Slanders came up with for the how to write epic campaigns, and I really actually like his style for that. So I sort of included the major points in the Game Master section, the Trail Master section of the Few and Cursed, and in Maximum Apocalypse as well. And essentially you have this sort of idea that there's a nemesis and then henchmen and villains, right? And so a villain is like a one-time entity that the players deal with that is adversarial. Henchmen are sort of reoccurring characters. Think of like the various different people that work for Splinter. So Splinter in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, Splinter is the nemesis because he's the constantly rolling in the background bad guy. And then you have these other characters that sort of show up all the time. That sort of help with that, but they're not like the foot soldiers. So foot soldiers would be villains, and then the various commanders of the foot soldiers would be the henchmen, and then you'd have the nemesis would be Shredder, right? So that's sort of the best way to look at it. And so this one is an adversarial, but it's a villain because it's a one-time, one-shot thing. We're sort of expecting Coronado to come up again, but we could upgrade him to henchman level if we wanted to. And then if we're using him for a campaign, and then maybe the Spirit of Coronado, and not the person. This is where it'd be interesting. Not the person whom the Spirit of Coronado is actually possessing, but the Spirit of Coronado himself might be a henchman in that they're helping the nemesis achieve some objective, but they're a reoccurring bad guy, right? And that would mean that they translate over to, if any of the players have the Cross of Coronado, they become corrupted, then Coronado takes over their body, and now we're back to having to deal with this Spirit of Coronado, but in a different form, and that would be the Few and Cursed twist, because now one of our players is the Spirit of Coronado, and is now helping work for the nemesis, right? And so we have this kind of interesting play that we could do with these possessing spirit types, which is the thing I was talking about in the last time, where I was kind of toying around with this idea of an object that holds the soul of somebody in it, because that you have this like back and forth transfer that can happen. So instead of becoming a monster per se, instead of turning into a crow or something, they get possessed by a monster who is maybe trying to do an objective, that they're in the middle of something, and so they really don't care about what vessel they're using. They just still continue to try to do that objective, which makes it a very interesting play, because the only solution then is to destroy the Cross of Coronado, but then it doesn't give the players the thing that they want, right? So there's that. The role that they play is to destroy the players. That's the role. They or maybe find a new vessel, and that's the role they're going to play. So that's the role they're playing in this adventure, and I say maybe find a new vessel because maybe Coronado doesn't necessarily accept the, or maybe not Coronado, the Spirit of Coronado, like when the Spirit of Coronado is about to lose, maybe it gives up and goes back into the cross, and then when the players have the cross, then they get corrupted by it, and then slowly Coronado starts to come back. This is fun. This is cool. This is a nice little thing we can play with in this adventure. So we'll go ahead and say that the goal of the Cross of Coronado, or the role that he plays, is destroying the players. He might have other motivations and goals, but that's not the point. That in this particular situation, the reason that the Spirit of Coronado exists is to essentially try to destroy the players, find a new vessel, and protect the Cross of Coronado, which holds its spirit. Activities. It is leading the cult in a lecture or some such, and therefore is not in the Sanctum Sanctorum where the Cross of Coronado is, because it is the spirit is off doing something else. Also has to run the day-to-day operation of the cult. So that's what the Spirit of Coronado is doing when the players come in. Goal and motivation. What is the goal of Coronado, the Spirit of Coronado? What is the goal of Coronado? See, now this is where we have to really think. What is the goal? What is the motivation for our cursed creature that is possessing a person? What do they want? We haven't really established anything for Coronado in this one, so whatever we do establish here for goals and motivations would then translate into the sort of showdown, because they're going to be trying to accomplish whatever that is when the players walk in. I know that in the RPG Explorer Society, that particular monster has a goal. In the Fast Times at Ruko Ranch, Ratman's goal is to get as much stuff out of Ruko Ranch as possible and then take off and leave it robbed. In the Hangman's Tree, their goal is to their motivation is to grow their gang. And so they have a horse thief that they caught, and he's hanging from the tree. They're waiting for nightfall for him to come back alive. So there's a motivation there. In Wendigo Woods, the Ravenmocker, the cult of the Ravenmocker, is trying to get something to offer the Ravenmocker. And so they're only stalking the players because they want to get something for their father or god. And then they are watching the players walk their, in the words of my father, happy asses, walk themselves to the toward the Wendigo, because, you know, be a neat show, I guess. But they're already being stalked by the Wendigo. They just don't know it yet. The Ravenmocker, the cult of the Ravenmocker, does, because they know where the Wendigo is at all times. That's how they avoid it. And the Wendigo's goal is to turn more people into Wendigos, or eat the flesh, right? So it's eat flesh, turn people into Wendigos, one of those two. But our Coronado is not a flesh-eating person or monster. Our Coronado is a conquest monster. So build an empire. I guess that's what it is. So our motivation for our Coronado is to build an empire. And since we're in the water world of water barons, build an empire. So we'll say that Coronado here is a build an empire kind of person or kind of spirit. Gold is not, so water is the new gold. So gold would be not what they're looking for, but water. Okay. All right. Took me a minute, but I got there. And I also discussed what some of the other monsters' motivations are. Relationship with the players is obviously enraged, meaning that a quick attempt to convince Coronado to give up will be harder for the players. They will require like 3 degrees of success, or potentially we'll have 3 disadvantage on it, thereby making it a great success required to accomplish the disadvantage, great success. No, it'd still be a 3 degrees of success, but also have disadvantage on the roll. Sorry, we'll respond on that later. Again, about the Quickstarter, or about the Kickstarter. Quirk for the Coronado is that he speaks Spanish. That's a quirk. And appears, moves, we'll do that, and then we'll go moves awkwardly in someone else's body. Not enough for Coronado to not be effective in, say, a fight, but awkwardly enough that it stands out as weird. And then this is Coronado, right? We know that. We already know the name of this ghost. So there we are. We've got some NPCs now figured out. We've got the cultists of Coronado. We have the Spirit of Coronado, the cultists of Coronado, the roving guards of the cult of Coronado, the assassin of the sands, and the Alma Ghost. That's a decent number of NPCs that we've sort of fleshed out. And like some of these are groups, like this roving group, or roving guards is a group. The cultists are a group. And so we'll come up with some names for them. But yeah, that's it. I don't know that I need to go any longer today, because that's how you do NPCs in the Few and Cursed. And since nobody has any questions, which is sort of what I would be using some of this time for, yeah, that's what I do. And I kind of do this for every NPC that I throw into a story, because I kind of want them to have this background. I don't necessarily write it out like this. So what I might do, let's do how I would write this out in an adventure. I would go back to the Game Master notes, right? And so we've got this cross of Coronado. We've got the possessed stats, but we need to talk about the motivation. So we'll put the stats a little bit lower. and we'll go with the motivation. So basically what I would do is I would go over here, and I'm going to take all this stuff, and then I'll go I'm just going to copy it just so I can be all in one screen. All right, so I would say something like this. Possessing the cross of Coronado gains corruption, overwhelms with the spirit. Okay, so the spirit of Coronado, this is how I would write it out. Spirit of Coronado possesses the body of a human that found the cross in the cave near where there is now a fortification. Fortification. When in the body, the spirit of Coronado moves awkwardly because it moves awkwardly as it is trying to puppeteer someone else's body. It can exit the body and re-enter the cross at will, in which case the vessel, the human that is possessed, drops unconscious. So here we go. So we've got some things. Otherwise, the spirit of Coronado is busy with the day-to-day operation of the cult and seeks to expand his empire. There. Yeah. And then there's part about speaking Spanish. I'm going to do this in the showdown. Or the lead-in. Be like, enter the spirit of Coronado. Cultist enters the room. The spirit of Coronado speaks to his cultists in Spanish, even if they do not know Spanish. If he encounters the players, he will shout at them in Spanish before ordering his cultists to attack. However, they are ineffective combatants and work as barriers. While Coronado combats the player characters. There we go. All right, so we got the Spanish bit. We've got the fact that we've now sort of mentioned the fact that the cultists are more like a barrier, and then the enraged thing. So we'll leave that note though. But that's how I kind of write it in. Now we may write something like, when confronted by the player characters, Coronado is enraged that they made it past the guards. Unless they used charm to convince the guards to grant them an audience with Coronado. Right, and then we do that. In which case, only angry with the players. There we go. There. Right, so now we've covered all of it. So now we've got all of that stuff for this stuff for the Spirit of Coronado, and we've put it into the notes on Coronado, and that's how it will appear. It won't appear as this like bullet point thing. That's how it will appear in the adventure. So that's it. That's how you do NPCs. You should probably use this for any game that you're doing, whether it's Few and Cursed, whether it's Maximum Apocalypse, or whether it's Dungeons and Dragons. Like, this is kind of the thing that you should do. I know this means that a lot of prep on the Game Master side, and that's true. If you are a player of an RPG and you don't think that your Game Master puts a lot of effort into your game sessions, well, I don't know what to tell you, because if you've been a game master before, you realize that it's a lot of work. I know there's like, and I know that I kind of also sort of go with the idea, depending on the game, that the game master is also a player of the game, and that is true to some extent. But there is a different level of play that goes along with being a game master versus a player. I'm currently a player in a Hunter the Reckoning game and a game master in Hunter the Reckoning game, and the amount of work I put into being the game master of the Hunter the Reckoning game is far more, like hours upon hours upon hours more than any of the work that I put into being a player in the Hunter the Reckoning game. But on the other side, when we're running the game, in the case where I am the game master of the Hunter the Reckoning game, the storyteller, I actually do like little prompts and describe things, and then like let the players do a bunch of stuff. Like I let them role play, I let them decide what they want to do about situations, and I am pretty quiet in the background, just looking at my notes, waiting for them to do things. But then on the other side, when I'm a player for Hunter the Reckoning, I hear the prompts from the Game Master, and then I have to take those and roll with them. So it feels like it's similar levels of work, but in reality, for the Game Master, it's like this. Like, we've just spent an hour and a half making NPCs, well, roughly an hour and a half, making NPCs for a game, for an adventure that we may or may not ever run. And this is just so I can explain to you how to make NPCs, but in reality, if I were making this adventure to run, this is how long it takes. It's already been, we worked on this 2 hours last week, an hour and a half today. So that's 3.5 hours, and we're still not done with the adventure. So a game session, right? This game session that we play out might be 2 to 3 hours long, maybe 3 hours long, we'll say. So we've already spent that much time and extra making the adventure, and so hopefully we can push it out to 3 hours. Hopefully it doesn't get solved in like 30 minutes or something, because people just blew through everything. And there's no guarantee that they won't. There's also no guarantee that the players will even accept this story at all. Maybe they just go, oh, cool, an assassin in the sand, we take him out. Oh, there's a fortification? Yeah, we're going to go the other way. That could happen. And so just remember, just have some respect for your game masters and like treat them nicely, because this is the kind of thing that they have to do whenever they're trying to create an adventure for you. So there's that. But if you're a game master, you know what I'm talking about. And these are just some tips and tricks that I have especially for Few and Curse, but for Maximum Apocalypse as well. But I think I am going to end the session a little early, because I am going to be heading into Random Worlds chat here in a little bit, where I'm going to be answering direct Q&A questions about the Few and Cursed. And so if you want to continue chatting, if you see this and you want to watch, or you want to, it's not really a watching thing, it's more like just like a chat, because it's Discord. If you want to come to the chat, then come to the chat and join me. But I will be in there now, and so I will end this for today with this information. Very helpful hour and a half of creating NPCs, and I will leave that for all of you to sort of think about and work on, and maybe it'll help you create cool NPCs for your stories that feel like real people rather than just set dressing. So that's where I will end this. So see you all next week at the next one, where we're going to talk about campaign writing and how to write multiple adventures that lead toward an end goal. And that's what we're going to be doing next time. So I will see you all then. Goodbye now.